Hi, Gary Rucci here, Director of AOG Mission. Our forums are a critical strategy for mobilizing and engaging churches and helping them to discover their unique and God-given role in the Great Commission. Without exception, therefore, we can't ignore Israel in this process because God has an agenda and a timeline that is running with Israel.
Part of that kind of missional heart and understanding, God's kind of been giving us a much bigger picture of his overall plan of salvation that he's doing, not just in the UK, but in the nations. And as part of that, God's given us a real heart for Israel, for the Jewish people, but also for the Arabs and for the church in our day. As we are looking to impact more of the culture and the society that we live in, I think we need to understand the big picture of his salvation purposes.
As a relatively new church, we wanted to find a way that we could engage in work that was going on in the ground in Israel.
On the weekend that our first direct debit went out to support Miles was not only a weekend where we had great breakthrough in the life of the church spiritually, we identified that as a significant weekend.
I believe that God's heart originally for the Israeli people was that he called out a people for his own. The same way that my boys are so important to me, and that whatever they do, even in times when there's been disappointment, they've remained my sons. I feel something of the heart of God for the people he originally chose to be his own.
As a church, the Bible says that the Gentiles were also added. The Spirit's been poured out on them also. And it's like he's used the Jewish people to bring these gifts and these covenants, these promises. And it says we, the Gentiles, were once far away and now been brought in.
Jesus is Jewish. All of his disciples are Jewish. It's not necessarily that Israel should be the whole emphasis. But the fact is we should be reaching out to everybody. But we should not forget the children that basically handed us, if you will, the actual gospel.
And I think sometimes the wrestle that Christians have, whilst we know what it says in the Bible, there are lots of voices outside the church, and sometimes within which perhaps political, perhaps vie for people's attention, where the Bible talks about loving Israel. It seems to be a conflict where other voices are trying to drown that out.
I still believe that in the middle of God's love for the whole world, he still has something for his people.
Grew up in a Jewish family, so my mum and dad both Jewish, and went to synagogue, had my bar mitzvah, had a pretty radical encounter with God. I realised this New Testament is written by Jewish people, and this whole thing has a Jewish thing running through it. This isn't some it used to be Jewish. Jesus didn't used to be Jewish, and now he's a Christian. And the more I read and looked into it and worked out, well, how do you want me to live as a Jewish believer?
Both my parents were Orthodox Jews. When I was a kid, my father lost his business, lost everything, and committed suicide. My mother had a nervous breakdown. She became an alcoholic. She died 2 years later, and all three of us kids were turned over to Jewish Children and Family Services. And at 15 years old, I cried out and I said, God, if you're really the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, like I was taught when I was a kid, help me get my life straightened out. Some of my friends who I'd met on the streets that were a bunch of hippies, all four of these young men that were also Jewish had all gotten saved, and they were having a Bible study. I thought they were all crazy. One of the guys led me to the Lord.
Where we have seen phenomenal growth over the last 7 years. But what a lot of people don't know is the story behind us getting this facility. It directly relates to our blessing the nation of Israel. But suffice it to say that we were in dire straits literally days before we were supposed to exchange the keys and all that to get this new building. We were told that it was bought out from underneath us. And a man called my pastor and he said, I can help. I'm a businessman. I'd like to help, but I want to ask you this question first. Where are you guys at on Israel? What is your heart? And our pastor said to him that if you bless the nation of Israel, you will be blessed, as Genesis says. And if you curse Israel, you're cursed. Anyway, this was the right answer to give, because that was the kind of the key that unlocked this man's involvement. God would have had to choose a different way to provide, but he chose to tell his story through our pastor blessing the nation of Israel.
So I see this thing about Israel as being simply understanding God's heart and purposes. That the question is, does God still have a plan for the Jewish people that is not just in the way that he has a plan for everyone? And I think, scripturally speaking, the answer is yes.
I think the preaching of the gospel in all the nations and God's timeline for Israel go hand in hand. At the Israel Forum, which we're inviting you to be a part of, we're hoping to mobilize churches into reaching all peoples within Israel.